Hello and welcome. This is Business Incorporated coming to you live from our Lagos studios. I'm Chimeze Obi Iwago. On the show today, South Africa's Tiger Brands flags loss at meat unit after listeria outbreak. 7 firms to bid for majority stake in Zambian oil refinery. Plus, Congo tamps down miners' expectations of concessions on new code. Let's get the show started now with the markets. And here in Africa, all the markets were in the red at intraday. The Nigerian stock market index was down 0.51%. South Africa's JSE index down 0.22%. Egypt was down 0.15%. However, Kenya closed in the green on Friday. And markets in the Middle East were trading mixed at intraday. Qatar was the highest performer, up 0.99%. Abu Dhabi was also up 0.21%. However, Dubai and Saudi were both in the red, down 0.29% and 0.18% each. In Europe, markets were lower in morning trade as investors looked ahead to a trading week in which the Federal Reserve is likely to hike interest rates. Let's get more details from Janelle, my colleague in Frankfurt. Hello, Janelle. Good afternoon. A beautiful week to you.
Good afternoon.
Now, the U.S. Fed Jerome Powell is getting set to chair his first monetary policy meeting. What is on the minds of investors on this, and how will it play into the U.S. dollar in the short term?
Well, there is a bit of a risk-off sentiment dominating investors' mood today as they anxiously await what this new Fed chief has to say. Now, markets have already priced in one rate hike to be announced this week, with 2 more to follow as expected within the year. But analysts are also indicating that 1 more could be added to the mix to total 4. And though that is proving somewhat supportive of the dollar, we saw the dollar edge up today this morning against the basket of currencies. But those gains seem to be quickly relativized. If you compare it to a year previously, the dollar is still comparatively weak. And just generally, the word around here is not to overthink the dollar's bounce, because really from here on, it could go anywhere. Now, there's the argument that a rate hike could further boost the dollar, as well as some other factors ongoing, like a further fall in unemployment to 3.9%, as the forecasts are outlining. And also the fact that Mr. Kudlow, the incoming advisor to President Trump, set to replace Gary Cohn, has also himself said that he is in favor of a stronger dollar, and as is Trump. Now, of course, you have to take the flip side of that and say that this improvement, for example, in the labor market that I said was forecasted might not actually transpire. And you also have the current discussion around an impending trade war that, of course, could weigh down on the currency as well. And you might end up with a weaker dollar as a result of all of this. So I guess it's anyone's guess at the moment, really.
And now in China, the central bank has an incoming chief, the first in about 15 years. How much of Yin Gang does the markets know, and what his policy direction would be for China and towards Europe and the U.S.?
Well, he's American educated. He got his PhD from the University of Illinois, and that's something that every media outlet seems to have picked up on. And now, previously, he's called for greater market access for foreign investors and for greater internationalization of the currency of renminbi. Now, this seems to be a further strengthening of the liberal elements already existing within the People's Bank of China. Now, that said, he has quite a task ahead of him. He has to offset the financial risk that is presented by China's looming debt. He has to sort of limber up a financial sector that's been weighed down by these big giant state banks. And he'll also have to take charge of opening the financial markets for more European and U.S. investors in such sections like insurance, for example. And we know that's been on the transatlantic wish list for quite a while. And of course, embedded within his duties, it will fall to him to mitigate any sort of trade conflict between China and the U.S. as China finds itself increasingly under pressure to balance out the trade imbalance between the U.S. and China.
Okay, let's look at the cryptocurrency markets. Is this the beginning of the end for cryptocurrencies as the G-20 finance ministers and central bankers place Bitcoin on the docket for their meeting holding this week in Buenos Aires?
You know, I wouldn't think so. And I remember we were discussing this, I think it was last week, and we were saying that central banks perhaps were not particularly threatened yet by cryptocurrency, with the actual systemic risk that cryptocurrency presents to financial systems being actually quite low at the moment, considering how many people actually invest in it. But the idea seems to be to try and have regulators step in to moderate the vulnerabilities and opportunities for abuse that you find in anonymous digital trading, like money laundering, like tax evasion, and fraud. Now, as such, what we might see might not be the end of Bitcoin, but certainly central banks and supranational institutions like the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, they would probably want to see some adjustment to the idea of what cryptocurrencies are, most especially perhaps a rethink of the idea of a decentralized currency. Now, what traders will be watching out for as this G20 goes on is that they will be looking for broad-based policy moves, collective action from the G20 that might establish the direction of future policy at a time where cryptocurrencies are still a small asset class, but growing very rapidly and in all sorts of directions. So Christine Lagarde of the IMF, notably last week, called for using the same technologies that support cryptocurrency in order to fight fire with fire, for example, using artificial intelligence and biometrics in order to help register suspicious transactions. So where the discussion goes from here will influence what cryptocurrencies will look like in the future, either in compliance of regulations or in the ways to find to circumvent them.
Well, thank you very much, Janelle. I guess we have quite a busy week in the world of business, talking about the Fed, the EU summit, and of course the G20. We'll sure keep an eye on all of these meetings. Enjoy the rest of the day.